get lots of questions about how I feed or maintain my starter, so I thought that I would record how I do that. The amount of starter you have to feed is going to be based on how much starter you're using to either bake bread, tortillas, etc. So it varies for each person. I always weigh out about 200 grams of starter because it gives me enough to make bread and all the other goodies that we like to have in this house. So here I'm just measuring out enough starter to have about 200 grams. And then whatever I have left over, which really isn't a lot to make with anything, I just will scrape it out of the jar into the trash. Some people don't like to discard. It's really just all about what works for you. After every feeding and I weigh out my measurements, I also like to clean out my jar so there's nothing kind of stuck to the inside of the jar. I've noticed when it is left there, it kind of gets moldy, and I don't really want it to affect the way my starter's growing, so I just like to wash it out between each feeding. So since I did 200 grams of starter, I'm gonna now feed it 200 grams of flour. I use whole wheat flour. You can use any kind of flour. Feeding it different flours is going to give it different flavors. A white flour or bread flour is gonna have more of a sweeter taste. Wheat flour is going to have a sweet, kind of sour, tangy taste, but very mild. If you do a rye flour, you're going to get that real tangy, sour sourdough flavor. I think you can also do a chocolate. I've never done that, so I can't really tell you. Obviously, it would be a chocolate flavor. But yeah, so you're going to add in 200 grams of your flour to the 200 grams of starter. Now it's going to be 200 grams of filtered water. Filtered water is the best. It doesn't have any, minerals or chlorine that's going to affect your starter. So try and get filtered water if you can. And then you're going to add that into the starter flour mixture and mix it all together. It doesn't have to be perfectly mixed. I would just say enough so where the flour isn't sitting on top and it's covered by the entire liquid. That way it can properly eat everything down. I like to scrape my sides down as well, so there's nothing sitting and hardening on the sides, and it's all still getting added into the starter. So this is what I store my starter into. I remove the rubber stopper so there's a little bit of airflow coming through it and it's not completely sealed shut. But there's so many different ways to store starters. So the key thing to remember is just to make sure you have equal parts starter, flour, and water. You kind of, as you go, will realize how much more you need, how much less you need, depending on how often you're using it. If you're not using it very often, then you want to put it in a sealed container with like a rubber stopper to make sure nothing's getting into it, and put it in your fridge. It can stay in there for quite a while. If not, I usually just keep mine out of the sunlight, keep it on the counter so it's easy to pull from. After about 12 hours, it should double and it's ready to use. I use these two books a lot when I'm trying to reference any recipes, techniques for either my bread, my starter. It's filled with so much information. Both have different techniques, both have different recipes, but there's so much really good information. They also have Facebook groups and Instagram, so definitely something to check out if you're wanting to get into starting sourdough.